so.
Awesome.
Start, Tanya.
All right. Well, we have received some feedback that y'all like it when we come together. And I think that this is so important that whenever we sit down for these coffee talks, we're always coming together and then coming back to ourselves. So I just want to lead us through a really quick place of centering, which is a practice that I would encourage everybody to use on a regular basis. One of the things that we're seeking is safety. We're seeking a safe place to explore who we are, a safe place to find our authenticity. And sometimes that means looking around and noticing that we are in a safe space right now. And then bringing our awareness to our breath and noticing that we have the freedom to breathe in and out without restriction, comfortably. Just notice whatever sensations are going on in our body, whether it be nerves, perhaps if you're listening, maybe you're having a sad day, a happy day, how that feels in your body. So just coming to the space of awareness, I'm in a safe space and I'm free to breathe. My heart is beating. I don't have to do anything to get my heart to beat right now. It's doing it on its own. In this moment, all our needs are met. We have oxygen and we have beating hearts. And we can be with whatever feelings we're noticing in our bodies. And we're safe. We're not going to die. Even though sometimes we feel like we are. Mm-hmm. It's okay.
And in honor of Thanksgiving, since I always feel like it's like such a gratitude push, going through that practice in like mindfulness and meditation and stillness, thinking about like we always have our breath and our heartbeat to just really, I mean, what more could you be grateful for? You know, like, yeah, there might be some turmoil in your surroundings sometimes, or things that feel like turmoil, but like, oh wow, when you can just like come here,
We're alive.
Overwhelming gratitude that I have. It's so incredible. I love it.
We're alive. So Erin,
let's get this party started.
Yeah. What are we talking about today?
So I thought we would talk about relationships with our spouses.
Spouses, partners, friends, maybe?
Yeah. Spouses, partners. When I say spouses, very loosely, right? Like whoever is maybe your significant person. And it could be, if you aren't with anyone, then it's, you know, friends that you're really close with or whatever.
Yeah. Like the person you share your life with the most.
Yeah.
I feel like I just had this conversation with my husband yesterday. I said, you know, I think I'm with my coworker more than I'm with you. And yeah, that was just a really interesting, like, aha, like, oh, put so much weight into like my marriage relationship. I'm like, oh, coworker marriage.
We kind of are though.
I know. It's a lot. It's a lot of interactions.
Erin's one of my work wives.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm polyamorous because I have Erin as a work wife. I have you as a work wife.
Yeah.
I have my husband.
Yeah. And what a beautiful like contribution, you know, to have multiple people to kind of bounce things off of. And I just think I've never really honored that relationship. I've never really like thought it was that important. And then I'm like, oh yeah, to think about the amount of time that I spend with that person. Yeah, I really need to evaluate that.
And how we get, like how we can receive different things from different people. I think in mainstream, we think that our spouse, I mean, ultimately, right, it's always our responsibility to meet our needs. but we've been taught, right, that our spouse is supposed to meet our needs. So then when we're constantly looking for that within our spouse, obviously we're not giving that to ourselves. And also there are just things, I think everyone's spouse or whatever the most prominent person in your life are, like maybe that there's not a match there, and that's totally okay. And that expectation that we want them to be that way versus allowing them to be who they are, and acceptance of that.
My spouse, my husband, David, was just saying yesterday, what was it, Aaron, you were sitting there. What was he said? Basically, all miscommunication or challenges are just
All challenges
are like uncommunicated or hidden expectations that we have, which I think is so true. Like we expect other people to make us feel good, other people to make us happy, other people to make us feel attractive, complete, like all the things.
I feel like I did that for like, how long have I been with my husband? I always say 100 years, even though obviously that's not possible.
Does it feel like, is that a good thing? Like it feels like 100 years, like it feels amazing.
It's been more than half my life. I know that. Like I can't even do the math. There's like so many numbers involved, but like 24 years I've been with him. Not married, but like with him.
Yeah, together.
And I mean, maybe for like at least the first 14, probably more like the first 18 or 20. I expected him to make me feel good about me and constantly asked him and like spoon fed him this script of like, do this, say this. And then when he would do it, because he's like the most like giving person, I would still feel inadequate or empty. And I was just like, what is wrong? You need to do better. God bless him and his patience. Because then I had to learn that it was not him, right? Like the whole thing. I mean, it was like, one, I wasn't able to receive it. And when I did receive it, I didn't believe it. And so it was just like, I had to change my own beliefs about myself and be my own source of love and joy and happiness and not make it his job, but the fact that he stuck around.
I love our spouses, right?
I don't know if you can hear me up there talking good about
this
him.
is really interesting. So we've talked a lot about like power and love, and you would probably assume the love, right? We all have it within us, right? But like more so of the love for you, Christy, and you wanting those like words of affirmation and like, I'm pretty, I'm, good enough, all of that. And me, I would probably say more power, right? And like, I've always come from a place of like, you don't have to tell me any of that stuff. You just need to do the things to make me feel better. Like you need to keep the house clean. You need to like
acts of service type of stuff.
Yeah.
David's very similar. He is like, what he gives is an acts of service kind of love language. And I'm very similar as well, but the dynamic between my husband has been power, and I've been more slanted towards love, and just noticing he doesn't need me to fluff his shit up. Like I felt like I needed, like, tell me I'm beautiful. Tell me you love me. Tell me how sexy I am. Tell me these things. Or I'm like, I was always like, I hope he'll tell me these things. And then he would. And Christy, just like you, I'm like, I can't receive this. You need to tell me more.
Not even on a conscious level, right? Like
No.
It wasn't like a conscious rejection. It's like the analogy that I said, like there's a hole in the bucket, like it just like falls to the bottom and it's gone. It's like, yeah, you need to just keep telling me more. Meanwhile, like there's nothing being like contained or received at all.
Yeah. And I'm curious, boy, this is actually one of those times where I'm like, David, come here, come join us for a second, because I'm super curious, Erin, what you just said about like, I don't need you to fluff my stuff. I don't need you to tell me I'm lovely, I'm beautiful, all of those kinds of things, but do what you're supposed to do.
Mhm.
Let me be able to count on you. Let me be able to trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And I think that's probably one of the things that, if looking back, we start in this place of unconscious before we move to like, we have the awareness. The awareness leads to understanding. The understanding then leads to acceptance, integration. So looking back when I was definitely more in the unconscious, I see where I probably drove my husband batshit crazy when I would say I was going to do something and then I wouldn't, because he's like, I can't rely on you. And as a manifest generator, I'm always also switching things because I'm like trying to find my flow, going with the thing that feels right now. And he's a generator, a pure generator. So he's like, I'm going to commit to this thing. Once I give it my energy, it's here. I'm in it till the end kind of thing. And so it's like just seeing that all the times that it probably had him feeling
Unsupported.
What
Okay,
an
so-
interesting, I'm so sorry, but it's like the interesting thing, because Erin, you're the
I
generator.
was just about to say that.
We're both married to generators, Tanya and I.
Yep.
And this is a common challenge in the house where Craig might say like, hey, will you do the dishes? And I'm like, yeah, no problem. But I'm going to do them when I'm ready to do them. And I'll turn around and he's doing them. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm
Just had
doing
this
the dishes.
conversation last
And he's
night.
like, but I want them done right now. And I'm like, wait 20 minutes or 15, whatever. And he's like, no, I don't want to look at them. And I'm like, okay, your problem. Like, I'm willing to do them on my time, but I always forget about like that part of the generator, because I trust that I'm just going to do it whenever. And I might look like a floundering fish doing it, but it always gets done.
Yes. So I am. So Christy, your spouse is a generator. Tanya, your spouse is a generator. I am a generator. I am the female version of your spouses. And my spouse is a Manny Jin.
Like,
so the gift you girls give me all the time is I get to get compassion or grow my compassion because I get to see it through the lens of you girls and like, oh, okay. Instead of like the way Jason is like, oh, this is just how you are. Right. Like, and growing my compassion bubble capacity, whatever we want to call it. Right. Because Tanya and I were just talking about this last night about how when Jason worked a normal 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. job, he was gone all the time. I cooked and I did the dishes, and obviously I was also in that unconscious state. Like if my kitchen is all clean and tidy, then I can finally feel okay. Right. Mm-hmm. Versus just being okay with whatever happens. And he would say he would do the dishes, exactly what you just said. And I would want to pull my hair out because when I say I'm going to do the dishes, that means right now. And for him, it means whenever he feels like it, but he's going to take care of it. Yes. And so exactly what Tanya was saying about like not feeling supported. It's like, I can't rely on you because I don't know when you're going to do it. And there was such tension for so many years. I mean, we've been together for 14, and I have this little book that when we would have our conversations, I would write down like, what does he want? What do I want? And you can just flip through there of the years gone by, and it's the same thing. He wants more love of me saying, I love you. I appreciate you. And, initiating sex, right? Mm-hmm. Those are always his wants. And my wants are always like, do what you say you're going to do. Don't have me asking. And I mean, like years, 09, 10, 11, like you could just like reel it, right? And it's like same movie, different day.
Yeah.
What's hilarious about that is I just remembered, and I thought about this last night and I didn't say anything, is that we used to have a term with our daughter. Our daughter is also a manifest generator. And we would ask her to do something, and she would be like, yeah, I'll do it. And then David would, we both would get upset with her about not doing it. But he was like, she said she was going to do this. And we instituted the RTFN, right the fuck now. We're asking this to be done, RTFN.
I love it. And it just is blowing my mind because both of my kids are manifesting generators too.
So is my kid. So we all have the same,
all of our children.
all of the same children are the Manny Gens and
our spouse combinations. And it's such an interesting perspective. I'm so glad that you brought up, Erin, your perspective of like maybe even David brought it up about not feeling, what did we say, dependable or
supported.
Because in my heart, when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. Right. And like, I don't bullshit you. I don't say yes and then mean no. I mean, I used to, I don't anymore. And so to think that my choice of doing it or my following kind of my own path of doing it is communicating a lack of support is really interesting. Like it's being interpreted that way. And maybe I could encourage myself or see myself following through a little quicker.
Or just having the conversation, right? Like that's one of the things that we've really gotten better at was like, okay, do you mean like in this moment, like the next thing I do, you want me to do that? Or do you mean like by a week and not just dishes, right? But like whatever it is, because here we go back to like, I'm having a thought that when I asked to do the dishes, that means right now. And he's having a thought of, oh, it's going to get done today. And not clearing up that communication. And then this whole story, right? The stories we tell, what we make that mean, like, he doesn't love me. I'm not supported. He doesn't appreciate me. You know,
I have to do it all myself. Wasn't that your big one?
Yes.
Yeah. There's so many stories, right?
Yeah.
I think we could have a coffee chat just on this bullshit stories that we tell.
Like hundreds of them, probably.
Hundreds.
We will be having over the course of time, because like that's what it all comes back to is all of these stories and expectations. It's that old patterning of what's expected. David even asked me the other day about, we went for a walk and he said something about gender roles. We were listening to a podcast about some people that were basically making the transition to living aboard a boat. And she was talking about like blue roles and pink roles or purple. And so that just brought up the conversation on our walk. David asked me, you know, what I thought about that, about the gender thing. And I'm like, I think that's a lot of the old way of seeing things with gender as like, well, this is a blue role or this is a pink role. I mean, really, they should all just be purple roles because we're all both. We're all both the masculine and the feminine. And so I was like, I used to have some serious stories about like dishes. Dishes seems to be a great topic. Dishes and food or cooking. When David was working full time, even though I was working part-time still, and in some ways I felt like I was working full time because I was taking care of our daughter primarily, plus running my business, plus managing funds in the household. But I told myself that I also needed to do the cooking and cleaning up of dishes and stuff because he's working at a job. And so, of course, he probably expects that I am doing these things. Now, he never, ever said, like, where's my dinner? Or why is this kitchen such a damn mess? So, yeah, just like the expectations, the patterns and beliefs that we put we've had, like, we've taken from our parents and their parents took from their parents. Like, what are these roles? I mean, even going all the way back to the way back, like
Mhm.
like the men as the hunter gatherer, the women as the cooking and sewing. But there are some cultures actually where those roles are reversed.
Mhm. Yeah. I do think it's such a great conversation to just have in people's awareness because every household works and functions differently, right? And it's like it's your four walls to decide what works good for you and to know that when that role is no longer working, that you can like speak up, right? Like Craig is a really good cook and I'm a really horrible cook, which was a very defeating role for me to accept. Like when I really wanted to be like that. I've always like worked outside of the home, but like the mom, right? The mom that can cook all the great recipes. And my daughter's like, really, you're just not a good cook, mom. You're just not. So like just kind of admitting defeat. I have like 5 whole dishes that I could make my whole lifetime and that's it. But he's our really good cook. So he does all of our cooking. And there was once, like, I don't know, in the last couple months, and he was like, I'm tired of doing all the cooking. I'm like, well, thanks for telling me because I can step in, right? And we might just have to sacrifice and eat my crappy cooking, but that'll give you a break from like having the burden of this responsibility. Um, but like coming back to the communication space, right? Like it just has to be open conversation about it and not like holding on to this like begrudging resentment, whatever, that never gets spoken, because then there's no adjustment that can be made after that.
I used to always say that I needed a wife because I've always worked and so has Jason, right? And
Mhm.
so, and I don't know if is this a Manny Jen thing or is this a gender thing? Maybe it's both, maybe it's nothing. But like when he gets focused, right? He like going to work, right? So he's not going to be thinking about all the other things that need to get done. That's where I would come in and be like, I need a couple of things. I need help from you. Like he's not going to see that. And so, he used to cook. I would do the dishes. And I had that story of like, I have to do everything by myself. So I'd have to take care of the baby and I had to work and I had to grocery shop or, and I had to, organize when the cleaner would come over, like all the things. And going back to letting go of some of that control, like what would it look like if the dishes weren't loaded exactly when I wanted them to be, right? Or, the house was messy and that was okay. I think we have at least I did, these going back to these expectations of it has to look a certain way for me to feel okay versus being okay with like, it got done, right? But maybe not to your expectation, but they did it and it's done.
I find myself having that conversation right now regarding my children, like loading the dishwasher, there's many wrong ways that you can do that, like when you
In your
open
mind.
it up. Well, I mean, I'm like, when you open it up and like cups are holding all of the water, I'm like, well, I mean, I guess I could just rinse them, but to me, I'm like, flip and they go back in. But to me, that's like an opportunity for my children to get some feedback on how to do it more efficiently, right? It doesn't mean like, oh, great, now my kids can't ever load the dishwasher. It's just like, we just need to tweak it a little bit,
It reminds me of like the Thomas Edison. Is it Thomas Edison that said, I know how many, like thousands of different ways how not to make a light bulb? When you said wrong, Christy, of course, my wrongness radar comes up. I know Aaron's did too. Like, there's no wrong necessarily, right? We're just experimenting and exploring with all the ways that we can do things. And that there's one side of opening up the dishwasher and seeing the cups holding the water and getting mad because you loaded it wrong. And now I have to come in here and fix this versus like opening it up and then just being like, huh. And then calling whoever loaded the dishwasher in and saying, was this your intention?
Right.
Because if
right.
it is, great. And, but not necessarily from a place of like sarcasm.
Right.
Like, is this how you intended to screw
That's
this
totally
up?
how I would have handled it though, right? I wouldn't have chosen like the negative, aggressive, like this is wrong, but I would have totally taken the sarcastic, like it's like the passive aggressive.
Which
Right?
is just a little
That's that-
anger underneath.
Yeah,
That's that love,
for sure.
afraid to express. Whereas Aaron would probably be like, what the fuck?
What the fuck?
Right. Right. I
You
would be
know?
what the fuck after like the fourth time. Like, come on, Max. I know you're trying to get out of this, but you're not. Just do it right. I know this is a black and white thinking for me. There is a right or wrong way to load the dishwasher.
We were just talking about this last night. I kid you not, because one of the things that I said to Aaron is I have this story that I had to always be the one to clean up the kitchen. And even as the Manny Jen, I'm like, oh, I had certain cues in my mind of when things needed to be done. Like I would be okay sometimes with dishes being in the sink, but when I went to go cook, I need at least one sink free. And so then I went into that passive aggressive, well, I guess I'm going to be the one to have to load the dishwasher because nobody else, like Aaron, when
Right.
you were talking about what you're focused on, David's focused on work. He's not focused on going into the kitchen after I've cooked a meal. But I grew up with this, if you're the one who cooks, you're not the one who cleans. So then I'd have a sink full of dishes and I'd go in, and then it was the passive aggressive, well, I guess if I'm going to cook dinner because that's what I'm supposed to do, that I need to do this. And then when things, I don't know exactly when it shifted, if it was possibly when our daughter moved out and moved to Japan. But I started noticing my husband more often doing the dishes. It's like it would get a certain place for him that he would do it, and he would load the dishwasher a certain way. And then I would come back in afterwards and I would move things around. One time I got up the nerve, like when I was still building up I can say things that are uncomfortable and live to tell about it afterwards. So I said, honey, you're loading the dishwasher not the right way. The right way is this way. And he was like, oh, so you want me to look? And I was like, please don't just stop loading the dishwasher now because I just said something and pissed you off.
Right.
But he did. And he did it that way maybe a time or two. And then he stopped. And then he went back to just loading it his way. And I was like, okay. And I realized last night when I was talking to Aaron about this, I'm like, I should just like let the dish, he unloads the dishwasher now too. So he sees what gets clean or what doesn't. And I don't like, I can stop having any expectation of a right or a wrong or how it gets done. I can like flow with that. And it feels, oh my God, it feels so much better to just
I'm
not be
there yet. I'll say yet. I have often blamed, my story has been, is that what we say? The story has been that as a Virgo, I have a strong desire for efficiency. And this is a very common thread of like my frustration, because I'm like, don't you see that there's a much more efficient way to do this? I do this all the time at work. And they're like, yeah, but we're not doing it like that. We're doing it like 7 times harder. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And yeah, that black and white, like right or wrong thinking is like really solid in my brain.
I have one of my girlfriends. Oh, well, I have several girlfriends that are Virgos, but one that I can think of in particular, that kind of stuff drives her crazy. And I think my husband has, it's either his Black Moon Lilith that's a Virgo. No, that's a Taurus. There's another part of him that has that efficiency part. That's actually one of the keys in, or not keys, but in human design, it's one of the gates
Okay.
as well. And human design and gene keys basically like same, different application, or how we work with them. But I think there's also that need for efficiency, and so yeah, that can weigh heavily into it. But I'm also curious, like, what if sometimes people need to do it the hard way? It just brought up the memory that my mom used to always tell me, you have to do everything the hard way.
Learn the hard way, right? I just learned the hard way. Have to learn it the hard way. I've said that my whole life.
But what if it's not so much that it's the hard way? It's just like hard is a judgment.
Right. It's just learning. And like once you learn it, it's easy.
Yeah.
Like the path, the journey.
Experimenting and exploring.
What I was going to say is like, what we're forgetting is that we're like both on the same team, right? Like with our spouses or whoever, right? Like we want the same thing. It's just the way we go about it might be different.
Yeah.
And then what you were talking about, Christy, is like that binary thinking, like my way is the right way and your way is the wrong way, versus like, I mean, I used to think that so much about Jason. Then once I like kind of expanded and open, I'm like, oh, like,
right. And like, what if like peace and love is the right way? Yeah. Right. Like, I'd rather be,
it just feels better.
I'd rather be happy than
right.
I'd be rather be happy than right. Like,
yeah.
One of my dear friends, Patty, would always say to me, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? But so this is like back to our human experience, back to how our brains are designed to work. Being right is being safe.
Yes. I was actually thinking that earlier too.
Being right is being safe, because if we're right, then there's a certain amount of being able, like I can predict, because I'm right, I know what to expect. This is a known, this is a certainty, versus wrong as we see it. Wrong is death. Wrong is uncertainty. Wrong is, I can't predict the outcome. I got it wrong. And I am like, there is no safety in wrongness as far as our mind is concerned.
You have the dogs. And I feel like that has been a big source of my growth. I have still so much to go through, but wrongness from my childhood was trauma. And so unloading the dish, or my children loading the dishwasher incorrectly, is not going to be a source of trauma for them. Right? Because like that's not their path. But my path has often been that like wrongness felt unsafe. And maybe that's why I have such a solid like grasp onto it.
Erin, what's rolling around in there?
No, she's a thinking.
Yeah. I'm just like, when I started, you talk about childhood trauma. And when I was started looking at Jason from the perspective, and myself, right? Like in all of, if we're speaking specifically on spouses, or it's just like, as this little boy versus this man who's purposely trying to do something to piss me off.
Right.
Like, oh, of course he does it this way because he was conditioned to do it, whatever it might be, right? Like, and seeing it from because I think compassion has really been my work of like seeing it from like, that man is nothing but love. He's not setting out to do anything to purposely upset me, and none of our spouses are, I don't think, I think it's just how we perceive it and how the lens that we have it through. And just thinking about when you talk about childhood trauma and our spouses, it's like we bring that with us into our relationships and how that affects us, and what decisions we're making or things we say is from things that we haven't, maybe we're not even aware of, or maybe we haven't healed yet. And it's coming from that very unconscious place.
Something that you just said that I want to like come back to regarding husbands. I think from a space of compassion, when they might do things on purpose, like, to me, that's like, it's just showing the wound.
Yeah. It's like the
Right?
little boy or the little,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And rather than just looking at it like you did this on purpose, it was like an attack at me. It's like, oh, you did this because you had something inside of you that was triggered, like a fear or a something. I don't know what, but yeah, it's like when you can look at it with curiosity and compassion rather than like defensiveness and judgment and attack.
And that's
then
also a hard thing to do,
absolutely.
especially the minute, if we look at the 3 sections of our brain, if we just simplify things, like this is a gross simplification. So if y'all are neurologists, don't get all over me. But like our prefrontal cortex, our rational brain, like this part of our head makes sense. We're here when we're just like, when we're working, when we're communicating, when we're solving problems from a place of curiosity, openness, creation, engineering. But as soon as something triggers within us this lack of safety, a conflict with our spouse, our husband, our wife, our lover, our children, right? Then we immediately drop back into this the emotional center, the limbic part of the brain, where we're now engaged in an emotional way. Our rational thinking mind is gone, right? We're back into that emotion. And then if the situation escalates or starts to grow in an unsafe place, then we drop back into that very primal part of our brain, into the brainstem, where it's just survival. So part of like this work that we all do together is not ever have the experience of not reacting, and like being able to just whip compassion and love out of our pockets like we have it on quick draw when something happens, but recognizing that when we've had a conflict or we've had a disagreement or we've had a mismatch in expectations, that oftentimes we're, ourselves and or our spouses at the same time might drop back into those parts where we have less resources to be in curiosity. We have less resources to be in compassion. But that doesn't mean that we can't come back there afterwards or get there quicker. Like,
Yes.
a lot of the work that we do is shortening that refractory period of when we go into complete stress response, like a reflex or a knee-jerk reaction, to being able to lessen those reactions as we grow our ability to come back to a place of compassion and curiosity. But like, I don't want anybody shaming themselves or feeling bad that they can't just be like, well, geez, if I could just feel more compassionate or more curious, then everything would be fine. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me that I can't immediately find that? It's like beating yourself with a gratitude stick.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so interesting too that Erin was the one that introduced me to self-compassion. And Erin, did you tell me about the book or did you send it to me? I don't remember.
I think I sent it to you. I
And
think I had
was
read it.
like,
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm very compassionate. Don't you know what I do? I mean, I work with parents and have children with special needs, like so much compassion for these families. And she's like, yeah, but none for yourself. And that was that angle in, like, yeah, total mind blowing because I can have it for everyone else. And then a total asshole to myself about everything I ever did.
Okay. I want to ask two things. One, I think we tell ourselves that we're compassionate for other people and we're not compassionate for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, at least for me, my experience was that's what I would say, like, oh, I'm compassionate with other people, just not with myself. But if I was really being honest with myself, I was very judgmental and very
about to say I didn't know how judgmental I was and still until I started to practice compassion and recognized my own judgment for myself and then my own compassion for myself. And now I see conversations with coworkers that are very judgmental, and I find that I hold the space of compassion and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I would have totally been that person passing judgment.
Can I tuck something in here before you ask your next question, Erin? So, Christy, you have a conscious line 3 in your human design and gene key profile, which is all about that. I need to explore and experiment. You're exploring the whole rightness and wrongness of things and oftentimes have the story. The 5 is that unconscious side, which I've experienced that as well as a 4-6. Like I hold the 5 within my 6. As a 5 in the unconscious state, we oftentimes, we were also talking about yesterday, Erin and I, about like the first time I met with a coach, I was like, oh yeah, like my life is great. When we went through all the different categories, I was like, oh, I'm an 8, I'm a 9, I'm a 10. Like, this is great. This is great. This is great. I did not realize all that I was unaware of or unconscious of. And so when you were saying that piece about realizing the judgment and the lack of self-directed compassion, what that reminded me of is the 5 is like, it's like this mirror. So you look at me and you think you're having a relationship or a conversation with me, but really it's with you.
Yeah.
And when I do the same, right, it's the same thing back, but we're having this interaction that we think is going between us, but really it's always about us with us. Our own, like all of our outside judgment is our inside judgment. All of our, like, we think we have compassion, but we're realizing it's judgment. How much compassion are we actually having for ourselves?
Wow.
Yeah.
You don't even realize that those two are like the opposite of each other. To me, I didn't realize that that's what that was.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say, what Tanya explained and what is like going back to our brainstem and like, because it's like, oh, the compassion, oh, just have compassion. But, if your brainstem is here and then your limbic system is here, and then this is your prefrontal cortex, and they call it like flipping the lid. So like Craig says something to you, it triggers that trauma response of something. And then you're just like now in your limbic, it's like all bets are off. Like I can't even get to that place because I'm
think straight.
Yeah.
You're totally in survival mode. I think it was the coach training that I did. I think it was Dan Siegel that originally came up with that model of like brainstem, limbic, prefrontal cortex. And as soon as you have some sort of interaction that threatens your safety, the lid goes off. And just to be clear, especially for people that are listening, we think of like our old evolution, because our bodies are matter, they're way slower at catching up with our energy. We think that a threat to the body, a threat to the body's safety is like a Bengal-toothed tiger chasing our asses down. But in this day and age, it can show up as, Mom, you were supposed to take me to soccer and now I'm late.
Mhm.
And you're in the middle of doing something else. Or did you remember to pay that bill because I just got a notice that it's late? Threat to your safety. Or I don't agree with you.
Mhm. Or
Threat
I'm
to
like,
your
let me throw you. And I'm like, I deal with this 100% of the time with my parents that I'm working with. When we tell children no, huge threat to their safety because they are just in this like concrete world. So when we say no to something, that's like detachment to them.
Mhm.
And then there's this huge trauma response, right? Or like their tantrum. And then what do so many parents say? Like, oh, there's nothing to cry about here.
Yeah. Stop crying.
Suck it
Oh,
up.
or
Hush it
I
up.
would
I'll give you
hear,
something to
I'll
cry
give you
about.
something to cry
Yeah.
about. Yep.
And I'm like, but what if we have some compassion? Like, I know you're really upset right now, you know, but you're right. Like that this is such an interesting explanation too. The flipping the lid is so like relatable. And to the parallel of the parent coaching as well, knowing, I always say you can't rationalize with irrational. And so like this would be the irrational brain, right? And then as a speech therapist, oftentimes like my kids don't talk, the clients that I'm working with, and they'll say, use your words. And I'm like, there are none. Like we're gone. We're like blackboard, clean slate right now. Nothing is available. We need to get to like calm and collected, like allow that brain to like regroup. And then we can possibly use some words. But in the moment, we're pissed.
This is where in the moment, right? We just need to feel,
Yeah.
right? This is in the moment. If we try to do grateful stick, if we try to do compassion, if we try to, talk our kids out of it, because sometimes I notice myself like trying to tell Grace and it's like, oh, wait a minute. No. She just needs to be really pissed off right now. Like, why are you pissed off? Tell me everything. Give it to me,
Mhm.
and allowing ourselves. I think sometimes people mistake or confuse positive thinking, right? With like, there's no positive thinking right now. This is just the space to feel everything that needs to be felt, to let that come up and out and experience that, which could take a matter of minutes, hours, or days, depending on where you are, right? And once we do that, then we can then get back to this place. But what I think a lot of us try to do is, oh, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Right. And then we're just constantly in this.
Well, I'm like, I have this analogy. So like the lid is flipped open because there's like steam, right?
Yes.
It's like a boiling pot of water. And this would be like trying to put the lid on this boiling pot of water. And then the steam's like,
it's stuffing down the emotions.
Yes.
And if you like, I know you've probably had this experience, Christy, of watching kids. They move through their emotions pretty quickly. They can be crying 1 minute, laughing the next.
Yeah.
Our communication is mostly nonverbal.
Always. Yes.
And
yes,
when we say things like use your words, well, sometimes there aren't. It's just sensations that are going on in the body.
Yeah.
We stop ourselves from expressing those. And then we become this interesting amalgamation of what feelings we've suppressed, what ones we've allowed to come out and sort of like be our shielding, our armor. Some of us able to display anger more easily, and we're kind of like, we put up the shields, we put up our dukes. And then some of us are like, oh no, I'm going to go hide. I'm going to go like withdraw, cut off, stuff that any sensation down, go, whatever I need to distract. Children are the best model for us to know how
They're
to
so good.
like move through that. Fuck the words, because it really doesn't matter. And it's interesting because like I will try and take a step back sometimes now and look at, like, I'll go back in my memory bank of like either disagreements or interactions that I've had with David or my daughter and go, okay, if I were to look at this now from a place of like, I'm resourced, all my needs are met, I've oriented, I know all my needs, like breath, my heart, I'm good, I'm not in a triggered, stressful state. If I go back and remember an occurrence that happened between us that I didn't like how it went, what was happening? Like, if I can take a step back and look, what was happening potentially? Like, I'm just hypothesizing. I don't really know what my husband or my daughter's experience was in any given moment. But if I go back and I look at that with curiosity, then curiosity and practice, like, how might that have turned out different if I was in a place of loving or if I was in a place of compassion? What might have been? What might have been
I'm
different?
like looking curiously, like what were the triggers? You know, because it's like walking through a land, is it a landmine?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you don't know where they are, like then they start like blowing up in your face. But like for me, noise is very triggering.
Mm-hmm.
And I will often like shut off the radio and like everybody needs to be quiet in this car. And they're like, what is wrong with you? And I'm now they know what happens if they don't listen to the warning. Then like the lid blows. It's like I'm aware of some of these things, and I can feel like the water boiling under my skin. I'm like, okay, I need to tell you all something needs to change in this environment, or I need to remove myself. That's always the hard part when I'm in a car, that you're kind of a little stuck.
How does that show up in your marriage?
How does me communicating, is that what you mean?
Just like you said, loudness is a big trigger for you. Where do you feel like, whether it's actually auditorily from Craig, where do you feel like things are loud?
Me, I'm the loud one, which is ironic.
I love us.
He told me, we went to dinner on Friday and he was like, do you know that you were like saying cuss words loudly? I was like, oh, my bad. Yeah, I'm like, I'm the loud ass. That's so interesting. You're asking me, where is that in the relationship? It's totally me.
I just think it's funny because I remember a walk that I went on with David one time. And like, I have a story about not being heard. And so sound is sometimes a trigger for me as well. Like if there's too much conversation going on, too much, right? My judgment of what's loud, like taking in that sensation. I've been the same too. Like I can't figure out where I'm going. I've got to turn the radio down.
Absolutely.
I can't hear myself think. Or if my if I'm perceiving that my husband is really loud, I will be sensitive to that, but I also notice it. I tend to be the one who sometimes is loud. We were out walking. And my husband's also triggered by sound. I'm not as much, but he's talked about being triggered by sound and noise. We were outside walking and I was talking and he's like, use your inside voice. I go, but we're outside.
I'm like, this is 1000% me. I'm the person that, you know, like if something is wrong in your order, like you just get clarification. Like, I just need to change this. It's going to be nice about it. And my husband would rather crawl underneath the table or just eat it, you know? But when you crunch loud food at me, I don't like it. And being not heard, I'm like, all of this is somehow syncing together. I'm just not making the connections just yet, but like that is a very big deal to me. maybe I feel like I have to be loud so that I can be heard.
Maybe. I was just curious where that dynamic shows up.
Yeah.
Erin,
I
what
was-
were you going to say?
I was going to say, oh, this is really interesting because my dad used to always be like, you're so interesting with Grayson. Because when she was getting really loud or she wasn't listening to me, I wouldn't get louder. I would lean in and I'd be like, hey, so, and whisper and just like having to, you know, she's got to lean in. She's got to really focus, right?
Mhm.
Versus we think, oh, someone's being loud. I'll just be louder so I can be heard. And that just creates more noise and more chaos
Mhm.
versus
One of my
No.
tricks, Erin. It's one of my tricks. When I go into classrooms and I hear teachers yelling, I'm like, what if you whisper? And they're like, that will not work. And I'm like, let's try it. And they're like, holy shit, that worked. I'm like, I know. Isn't that amazing? I might know what the hell I'm doing. Just a thought.
And then how do you get to use that on yourself?
I know, right? All of your questions, Tanya.
Oh, this is really good too, because it's like, think about the way our bodies, right? When we're so
Mm.
tuned out, we finally hear when it's like yelling at us
Yelling,
versus
yeah.
it always starts with that little whisper.
Mm-hmm. And like getting in the moments of silence or the moments of stillness to be able to even hear it, right?
Yeah. Which is going to be like, I think that's next week's topic, right? Is our relationships with our bodies,
And ourselves.
will-
Yeah. Mhm.
which will be a good lead in because, like, I can share the story with you next week about. So, Erin being here with me right now, she's upstairs, I'm downstairs. She came to help me clean out some of our house that we've been living in for 20 years to get ready for a major transformation that my husband and I are moving into. And the difference between cleaning out 1.5 drawers versus an entire shed, and all the awareness that has been coming up with that.
So
And
good.
it's also beautiful, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay.
All right, ladies.
Until next week.
Until
Yeah.
next week.
Okay.
All
Fun
right.
chat. Fun chat. See you next time.
Love
Bye.
you all.